Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the apparently very hot topic of soil organic carbon. My name is Sarah Lugers. I'm the Director of Communications here at Gold Standard. So thanks again to those who have joined, and our apologies to those who weren't able to join because the webinar was full, but maybe listening to the recording later. We're glad that we're still able to provide the content to you in that way, and obviously welcome any incoming questions and ideas on an ongoing basis. So just to get started, I will take us through the agenda. I will cover some broad topics at the top, talking generally about the need for and the demand for soil organic carbon activities. And then we'll hear from our Chief Technical Officer, Owen Hewlett, who will give an overview to the methodology framework and highlight some of the differences from this framework compared to what some people on the line might be familiar with as it relates to our value change or the Scope 3 soil organic carbon reporting. And then we will hear from Giancarlo Raschio, who is our Senior Manager for Land Use, who will really get into the details and probably why you've all tuned in today to hear about how the methodology can be applied and some of the technical details that project developers would be looking for in applying to their projects. And then, of course, we'll open it up to questions and answer session. So please feel free to submit your questions as they arise using the questions function. And then, of course, we'll take them at the end during that transition as well. So with that, I'd like to first take an opportunity to say Happy Earth Day to everyone. It's the 50th anniversary. The theme is climate action, so it's very apropos, and I guess that makes every day Earth Day for us and probably for you too. But here at Gold Standard, we just did cross the 125 million credits issued mark. So a big congratulations and a thank you to the project developers around the world who have helped make that happen. Okay, so why soil organic carbon? I guess we'll start with some of the challenges. And the answer is varied. I think science is telling us that around half of the topsoil on the planet has been lost in the past 150 years because of increased demand for agricultural commodities, which has led to the conversion of forests and grasslands to farm fields and pastures. And without proper management, this can lead to degraded soils through compaction, as well as nutrient degradation and soil salinity. So we're increasing emissions and losing fertile land, but on top of that, soil degradation and GHG-intensive synthetic fertilizers lead to increased pollution, sedimentation in streams and rivers, which clog waterways, cause declines in fish and other species, and degraded lands are often less able to hold onto water, which can worsen flooding and lead to additional desertification. So we have quite a vicious cycle without this proper management. But the good news is that sustainable land use, including soil organic carbon sequestration, can help us meet our climate goals, which broadly are to balance emissions with sinks by around mid-century. And we're seeing that according to FAO, through soil organic carbon practices, soils can sequester approximately 10% of what we emit, which is obviously not insignificant. So while at the same time preventing soil degradation and erosion, the loss of valuable land and desertification, we can start shifting to a much more virtuous cycle. Because at the same time, these practices can improve crop yields and then therefore livelihoods for farmers and better balance ecosystem support diversity benefits. So that's the opportunity for the planet and for humanity, just in a small measure. But what about the opportunity as it relates to demand in carbon markets? And we see this as threefold. I've spoken already about the Paris goal to balance emissions with sinks, so soil carbon activities could be seen as kind of central to meeting those goals, and it requires quite a scale up in these activities that can actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. Indeed, the role of removals will be increasingly important to close the gap towards net zero. Our collaboration with the Science Based Target Initiative is leading to increased demand in that sense, because they are likely to, or at least considering, counting carbon removals towards science-based targets. In addition to that potential future demand spurred by SBTI, we've already seen a huge interest in nature-based solutions, where we saw the demand in last year for AR projects grow 342%. So we're definitely seeing interest, and this is expected to continue. And then finally, as it relates to CORSIA, the Technical Advisory Board has prioritized emission removals and has not, on the contrary, accepted avoided emissions from, for instance, RED projects. So why gold standard? Why do we have a role to play here? It should come as no surprise that the Soil Organic Carbon Framework Methodology carries all the same hallmarks of quality that gold standard's known for. So we think this is particularly important amidst this flurry of enthusiasm for nature-based solutions, because while it's core to meeting our climate goals, it's really important that they're done in a really robust and credible way. So, you know, we're seeing, and we're very happy to see, more players popping up focused on carbon removals. It's critical that we don't lose sight of the promise of environmental integrity that carbon credits represent. So, of course, carbon credits issued under this framework methodology, like any others for gold standard, will represent those same credibility principles that you see here. So from safeguards and stakeholder inclusivity to environmental integrity provisions around additionality, permanence, and leakage. And then on the demand side, or leading into that, the transparent outcomes logged in the registry, and of course, full independent verification. So in addition to that, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals sit at the heart of this. And the advantage to gold standard certification, beyond the credibility that I've just talked about, is that in one single process, your project is certified for both its climate impact and then to a minimum of 2 additional SDGs in one process. And in fact, we're working to make that even simpler with our SDG Impact Tools program, which have advanced quite a lot in relation to the land use portfolio and should be moving to piloting soon. So please keep an eye out for that. So with that overview, I'd like to turn it over to Owen Hewlett, who will talk about the methodology itself.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Sarah, can everybody hear me okay before I
Perfect.
dive in? Great. Yeah. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this. You know, it's a pretty hot topic, as Sarah already mentioned. Just a little bit of 3 bits of context setting before I get into it. One is just to say that, you know, this area, this focus on agricultural soils, is part of a bigger picture for gold standards that you may have picked up on at the strategy webinar a few weeks back, and that there will be more briefing and policy circulated for consultation in the coming month or 2. But we see it as a real opportunity, I think, to drive integrity and prioritize high development potential and development need activities amongst agricultural suppliers. Also aware that, or you may also be aware that we have a Scope 3 reporting program that encompasses agriculture, and I'm going to try and explain the differences there too. And then more of a prosaic point, I suppose. I just wanted to acknowledge that the kind of lead author for this framework was Jacqueline Gehrig-Fassel at Trees, a Swiss partnership who are very close to gold standard, that have a lot of expertise in methodology and standards development, and may be of interest for you to check them out. They're acknowledged, obviously, within the framework, and if you Google them, I'm sure you'll find them. But huge kudos to Jacqueline and to Trees for all their help with this. Just in terms of a broad overview, Giancarlo will go into more detail than I will, but just to give some scoping, I suppose, on some of the thinking that went into this, these three pillars here you can see on the screen. We really wanted to have a broad range of applicability for this framework. So we wanted to cover it to cover a wide range of activity types that deliver soil organic carbon benefits. And I suppose reverse engineering that, the thing we didn't want to do was introduce a stream of individual methodologies that maybe target no tillage or improved tillage or cover cropping or shade, like just lots of individual activity methodologies is where this could have gone. And that becomes really inefficient for us and impractical and expensive for developers to apply. So instead, what we wanted to do is create a framework approach, which you can think of more like an umbrella methodology wherein modules sort of plug into it for specific activities without reinventing all those core scope, boundary, leakage, baseline, all of those kind of rules can then be standardized and efficiently dealt with in a way that allows you to bring forward multiple activities. It could be several activities under the same project that increase soil organic carbon, but without having to apply several methodologies. We also wanted to bring flexibility in how you approach quantification, and we see three main ways of doing that. So you could measure soil organic carbon on site through soil sampling. You could take on data sets and models or proprietary tools that maybe have relevant data sets that you could apply to make things more efficient. Or you could apply default factors from things like the IPCC. And I would say that our preferred approach would not be approach 3, but it's there, certainly if it's needed. And I think there's an update due shortly if it's not already been released that may improve the credibility. And the way we manage that flexibility and approach is through uncertainty and deductions for uncertainty. So you could quantify entirely with approach 3, but you'll see a deduction from the amount of carbon credits issued, and that's the payoff there. And what we expect to see, I think, is that a blend of these approaches might be applied based on the activities and location. So you may find that there's a great model for approach 2 in where you're operating and for, say, 4 out of 5 of the activities you're targeting. But there's also a fifth activity you could do, and maybe you want to measure that one on site because there's no data set available for that and you want to add it. Or maybe you want to do that fifth one with IPCC defaults because it's kind of a bonus. And, even though it's going to be deducted, there's some extra credits available for that. So really broad range of activities, which we'll go into later in the call, but almost anything that can credibly increase soil organic carbon stocks, and then a real flexibility in terms of the approaches that are available to quantify. And then, as Sarah mentioned, it's hyper important really that gold standard improves and brings quality to this newly emerging area of the carbon markets. You must be aware, as we are, that there's several initiatives coming forward looking to build carbon market approaches to soil organic carbon. And I think, gold standard was formed really to bring integrity and quality to those areas of the market that most need it. And, we loosely define that by high priority in terms of development, sustainable development. So we very much focused on that. We very much wanted to get it out, even ahead of our broader carbon market strategy and policy. For that reason, it's really important to influence the direction of travel in the market. And as always, I mentioned Jacqueline's expert authorship, but this has also been heavily scrutinized by the experts on our technical advisory committee, as will modules as they come forward. Just slide there, please, Sarah. So I mentioned earlier the structure there, that broad range of applicability. Really what we're trying to do here is build a portfolio of the common term appears to be nature-based solutions. I'm not a big fan of buzzwords or phrases like that, but it seems to have gained some traction. And what we mean by that really is biogenic processes to sequester carbon. Now, we're pretty well known already for afforestation, reforestation. This framework really fills that out for agriculture. And there on the screen on the right-hand side, you can get a a kind of sneak preview of our thinking that you'll see in our carbon markets policy brief that comes out in the next month or two, that we're looking to expand upon that. And our priority, this is really indicative, but our priority is to focus on high development potential, nature-based sequestration activity types. So in forestry, afforestation and reforestation remains. We'll look into improved forest management. Over on the other side, you can see that we've got an interest in exploring blue and marine carbon. And then, to make that as efficient as possible for agriculture, soil organic carbon, we're looking to deal with one overarching framework methodology that we're discussing today. And then rather than, some examples there, improved tillage, grassland, cropland, rather than all of those having their own methodology, they'll come in the form of a module within this framework. That's really how we propose to structure this. So you could read this, I suppose, as an expansion and a rationalization of our nature-based solutions scopes for removals. The slide there, please, Sarah. Each activity module, so if you think of the framework as covering general requirements like our definitions of baseline or leakage or impermanence, then each activity module will have specific things related to that type of activity, but it'll zoom in on those. So it won't reinvent the wheel every time. But anything that's specifically needed for application, or things like crediting periods, for example, might differ based on the activity's time horizon. Anything that's around sources and sinks of emissions and leakage, etc., that's relevant to that activity. And then really the main focus is the third line there, which is how do we look at quantification approaches? What restrictions or opportunities are there at the specific activity level to build on those three broad approaches I outlined earlier? That's the kind of detail that would be in the activity module. To get a good sense of that, actually, to see a live example, the improved tillage methodology that we had has now been absorbed into this framework and represents the first approved activity module. So that really kind of illustrates the thinking in terms of rationalization and how these things will fit together. The slide there, please, Sarah. I just wanted to, before I close off my section, some of you may be aware that we're running a pilot program working with our partners over at the GHG Protocol, and Mars and Danone and the Livelihoods Fund and Climate Kick. And that program set out to look at how projects and programs in company supply chains could be quantified and how their impact can be reported against science-based targets. So that's in the context that science-based targets doesn't allow for offsetting. And so if you have actions you can take in your supply chain, then you account for those under your footprint rather than as offsets. Now, the reality is the types of activities that certainly agriculture supply chains are interested in are quite similar to the ones that we're going to be describing today. So it's very much a similar kind of suite of activities that, for example, a big agriculture purchaser might want to do cropland management or some of the other ones I linked to earlier, but they would report on that against their inventory rather than issue them as carbon credits. So I just wanted to highlight that there's primarily the framework that we have on the table for discussion today is focused on carbon credits and making sure those are fungible and credible. And it's not so much focused on scope 3. What I would say, though, is ultimately, in the spirit of rationalization and efficiency, we expect those things to get closer together into a unified approach at some stage. And by unified, I mean being able to follow a standard set of requirements and then choose whether you want to report it in your inventory or issue it as carbon credits. So although it's not the intention of the framework today, it is our kind of aspiration to look at how we rationalize those approaches over time. Just some of the very quick differences, like I say, for this framework in the context of carbon credits, we're really looking for fungible, high integrity quantification. The way we deal with uncertainty and impermanence is through deductions and compliance buffers, which isn't so appropriate to company reporting. We are going to be looking to issue carbon credits through this framework for use in general carbon markets and as potentially eligible under regulated schemes like CORSIA. But in sum, full applicability and really intended for offsetting claims for credits. Over in the ValueChange program, there's different requirements. They don't need to be fungible in the same way, and they follow a slightly different set of requirements for what you can output and how you can use it in line with the GHG protocol. So not the same, some overlap in terms of the types of activities, and a longer term desire to try and rationalize and bring those things together. If anybody's interested in the ValueChange Scope 3 program, do reach out to us, and we're happy to discuss and see if it might be applicable to you. But today we're really focusing on carbon credits. And I think that's it for me, Sarah. I'll pass back to the team.
Thanks a lot. And I believe I've passed the mouse to Giancarlo. Let's see if this works. Giancarlo, are you able to advance the slides?
Hi, Sarah, let me see.
If not, I'm at your service.
Yes, I cannot really control the slides, but
I shall do it for you.
You could, okay. Thanks a lot. Well, thanks, Owen. Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. My name is Giancarlo Raschio. I'm the Senior Land Use Manager at Gold Standard. And today I will give you an overview of the SOC Framework Methodology contents and requirements. Before I start with that, I would like to just give a short overview of the activity modules. As Owen mentioned, the SOC Framework Methodology provides an overarching set of requirements that are applied by any agricultural activity that increase SOC stocks, and specific requirements, meaning quantification approaches, assessment of leakage, definition of spatial boundaries, etc., are then addressed at the level of an activity module. So the approval of an activity module starts with the developer submitting a concept note for an eligibility assessment by the Gold Standard Secretariat. If eligible, a developer will submit a full draft of the activity module, which then will go under review by 1 or 2 internal reviewers. And it might be also the case that an external reviewer is required, as well as a 30-day public consultation period, depending on the complexity of the activity module. And the need of an external reviewer and public consultation will be defined at the stage of eligibility assessment. Once all the comments have been addressed by the developer, the activity module goes for vote at our Land Use and Forestry Technical Advisory Committee. The guidelines for approval of an activity module, which are in our website, also include a non-exhaustive list of eligible activities. And if a developer wishes to develop an activity module for an activity not listed there, then it's recommended to contact the Gold Standard Secretariat. And finally, I would like to point that activity modules can actually request deviations from the SOC framework methodology, but these deviations must be justified with public references. So I will start now with the applicability criteria of the SOC framework methodology. A slide, please. Slide, Sarah, thank you. So there are no geographical restrictions for the applicability of this methodology. Project areas are not eligible if these are on forest lands or wetland areas, and these are requirements coming from our LUF activity requirements. It is important to note that the project activities must take place on the same parcel of land as the baseline. And for site preparation, biomass burning is not allowed in the project scenario, and project activities cannot involve changes in surface and shallow water regimes. Slide, please. Continuing with the applicability requirements, project activities cannot lead to land use change. And it is required that managed cropping systems on which the project activity takes place should have been in place for at least 5 years before the project start. Now, if a project activity actually involves land use change, it is recommended to contact first the Gold Standard Secretariat for an eligibility assessment. Regarding food security, project activities cannot result in crop yield reduction. So yields in the project area should remain equivalent to at least the 5-year average calculated for the baseline scenario. Now, if yields in the project region decrease, the yield in the project area should not decrease more than 5% than the new yield in the project region. Slide, please. Now, I will talk about the project boundaries and under this methodology. So as for spatial boundaries, the project activities must be under the control of the project owner. And any areas leaving the project during the crediting period must be accounted for as full reversals. And for this, developers should refer to the performance shortfall guidelines that are in our website. So in terms of temporal boundaries, the crediting period is set at the level of the activity module, and it should be between 5 to 20 years. Slide, please. As for carbon pools, this methodology requires accounting only for SOC stocks for both baseline and project scenarios. And above ground biomass should be accounted for in the case there is a risk of leakage, which I will discuss later on. As for greenhouse gases, all projects must monitor CO2, whereas monitoring of methane and nitrous oxide might be required at the level of activity module. Now, it should be noted that a project is required, of course, to monitor all GHG sinks and sources that are affected by the project activities. However, omissions can be made if it is proven that these are conservative. Slide, please. Now we will go over the quantification approaches available in this methodology. Is that the right slide? Maybe go back, Sarah, please. Okay. So this is that's the one. No, the previous one, sorry. With the formula there, that's the one. So the general equation to calculate emission reductions with this methodology is based on the difference between SOC stocks in 2 points in time. And this is adjusted by the level of uncertainty that is calculated from the data. So to quantify SOC stocks, the methodology provides 3 quantification approaches. Approach 1, which is direct SOC stock measurement. Approach 2, which is the estimation of SOC stocks from models or peer-reviewed publications. And approach 3, which is the estimation of SOC stock using default IPCC 2019 factors. So although this methodology requires to apply the same quantification approach for baseline and project scenarios, changes in the quantification approach can be applied if these are conservative, and we will see more details about this later on. Now, these quantification approaches for a specific activity must be defined at the level of activity module. Now, regarding the identification of which one is the appropriate calculation approach for your activity, this depends on the data that is available to you. Now, it should be noted that quantification approaches vary in terms of accuracy and uncertainty deduction. So it is expected that results obtained under approach 1 will have the lowest uncertainty, whereas results obtained under approach 3, which are IPCC default values, will have the highest uncertainty, therefore also the highest deduction. Therefore, it is recommended wherever possible to work under approach 1 to increase accuracy and reduce uncertainty deductions. Next slide, please. Now, just to talk about approach 1, which is direct measurement. This approach requires direct sampling for SOC in a number of sample points to meet a gold standard land use and forestry uncertainty requirements. The methodology already identifies 2 eligible sampling protocols, which is the ICRAF protocol and also the VCS SOC module. If a developer wants to use an alternative protocol, this must be previously approved by gold standard. Slide, please. Under approach 2, which is the use of data from models and or peer-reviewed publications to quantify stocks, estimates must be validated for the project side and verified comparing these to measurements that must be taken in a set of sample sites. We will also cover this in a detail later on. Slide, please. Then approach 3, which is the use of IPCC default values. These values depend on what the land use is, the management practice, and the level of inputs applied both in the baseline and the project scenario. Slide, please. So I mentioned that the same quantification approach must be used for baseline and project scenario, and that changes are possible only if it's proven that these changes are conservative. Now, this methodology identifies 3 different scenarios under which a quantification approach change must or can be required. The first one is a neutral change. Now, so we will be talking about changing from one quantification approach that was used for the baseline scenario to a different one. First, I need to mention that if approach 1 or 2 was already used for the quantification of baseline, it is not possible to change to an approach 3. Now, if the original approach was either approach 1 or 2, a change, then SOC stocks calculated with a new approach should not differ more than 5% of the stocks calculated and verified with the previous approach. If this is the case, then the results of the new approach can be applied. Slide, please. The second scenario is when we are working with a SOC change based on modeling or peer-reviewed data. Now, if the change is from an approach 2 to a new approach 2, then SOC stock difference can be used if the difference is not more than 5%. If the difference is more than 5%, then the new values can be used if these are deemed applicable upon review by a VBB. If the model and data is deemed applicable, then this can be used. Slide, please. And the final scenario is a SOC change when we are dealing with a direct measurement. So if the change is from an approach 1 to a new approach 1, and the results are different by more than 5%, then the baseline value should be corrected accordingly, as the example is showing. Slide, please. Now, the methodology provides also guidance on how to calculate uncertainty for SOC stocks change, and it applies the uncertainty deduction rules according to gold standard land use and forestry activity requirements. So this means that an uncertainty higher than 20% at the 90% confidence interval will have to be deducted accordingly to the table presented in this slide, and this will reduce SOC stocks. Slide, please. Now, any project emission that is significant has to be accounted for. The framework methodology identifies emissions from increased fertilizer input and fossil fuel combustion, although other emissions may be identified at the level of an activity module. So regarding increased input of nitrogen fertilizer, the methodology doesn't make any difference between synthetic and organic fertilizers. Emissions from combustion of fossil fuels and electricity use must be accounted for unless these are lower in the project scenario, or if the difference with the baseline scenario is not significant, meaning less than 5%. And similarly, emissions from the use of agrochemicals also need to be accounted for unless these are lower in the project scenario or the difference with baseline is not significant. Slide, please. Now, leakage in this methodology is defined as an increase in emissions outside the project area as a result of the implementation of the project activities. Now, calculation of leakage should be addressed at the level of activity module. The default approach of this framework methodology is to assume that there will not be any yield reduction under the project scenario, because this is one of the requirements. Therefore, leakage can be assumed to be 0. However, if there is yield reduction in the project scenario, it must be assumed that the lost production will be made up for on land outside the project area. So in this situation, leakage must be accounted for. Slide, please. Now, it could be the case that a project intends to implement more than one activity. Therefore, it could be a situation where more than one activity module is applied to a project, or it could be also the case that a developer wishes to develop an activity module that encompasses more than one activity. So in these cases, there is a risk of double counting and benefit overlaps. So to avoid this, it is recommended that in such cases, approach 1 should be applied, meaning direct measurement. But approach 2 can also be applied as long as there is a clear delineation of the boundaries of the impact generated by each of the activities that are applied by the project. Slide, please. Now, as for monitoring, projects that apply either approach 2 or approach 3 must validate the results for SOC stocks. And this must be done with data from temporary soil pits. These soil pits must be representative of the project situation and distributed accordingly across all the strata in the project. These soil pits must remain open after the initial certification, so a VVB can confirm the applicability of the selected approach. In this case, a VVB will revisit a number of soil pits, and it is possible that the VVB conducts a sampling in a subset of these points if this is deemed necessary to confirm applicability. And that is, I would say, a short and quick overview of the contents of the SOC Framework Methodology and how an activity module can be developed and submitted for approval. So we welcome your questions at this stage. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much, Giancarlo. We have questions coming in already and a good amount of time to take them, so please keep them coming. Because most of them are likely to be above my pay grade, I will likely be passing them quickly to Giancarlo or to Owen. The first question that came in is a question around another protocol. The person asked, are you familiar with Seattle-based Nori? And if so, would you please explain how this framework compares to that of Nori?
So I can take that one, Sarah. So first of all, our SOC framework methodology has no geographical restrictions, and also is meant to have a regional scope as possible. This to account for the fact that data availabilities are different between countries, or also even at the level of jurisdictions. Now, I guess a key aspect that differs from Nori is that we are following the assessment of additionality as if is it done for all other land use and forestry projects, whereas Nori doesn't apply either a financial or a regulatory additionality test. I would say another difference is that Nori is requesting projects to conduct soil organic carbon monitoring 10 years after the end of the crediting period, whereas we only request projects to monitor carbon in the project areas within the crediting period. Then I haven't seen any clear approaches towards how to address for areas that leave the project, how to assume if carbon is kept there or if it's reversed. And then I haven't been able to read any approaches on how to deal with non-permanences. Well, we apply, as I mentioned, the same approaches that we do for all LUF projects, which is a 20% deduction of all issuances which go into a pool compliance buffer, which is then used according to our performance shortfall guidelines according to different scenarios. And sorry, I guess those are those will be the key differences. Also, the fact that Gold Standard has a very thorough certification process, which encompass not only third-party audits, but also in-house reviews done by our sister company, SustainCert, which is the official certification body for Gold Standard projects. So I think this gives additional layers of assurance that the projects are truly following the requirements in the methodology.
I totally agree with that. Just as Owen, just to add, I think at maybe at the more market level rather than technical level, you know, I think what Giancarlo just said about there is there is merit in the quality standards in the market and all the experience that the existing standards have gained over the last 15 or so years. So when I look at some of our colleagues in America at places like CAR and ACR, and ourselves, there's a reason why the Corsia scheme, for example, made those core standards eligible and excluded some of the newer startups. Now, that's not to say startups can't get good, but this stuff isn't easy. It's complicated. There's a lot that goes not just in the framework and the methodologies, but also in the governance, the transparency, the registry, the certification process that Giancarlo mentioned, and all of those give confidence to the market. And the explosion we expect to see in the market and in nature-based solutions, that has to be underpinned by quality and confidence, or this will become a difficult watershed moment rather than a really encouraging and optimistic one. Yep.
Thanks, guys. I would add that I get a little bit concerned. I mean, we've talked about kind of assurance, governance, and environmental integrity, but I think that a lot of the sales come around the promise of blockchain technology, where the credibility requirements in markets are really about the core issues that we've been talking about, and the infrastructure that exists today is providing good traceability already on the credit side. So maybe some more technical questions, more detailed technical questions. We have one that asks, can the SOC framework modules be combined with the gold standard afforestation, reforestation methodology? That is, can credits be claimed for both AR and SOC? Giancarlo?
So yeah, under the AR methodology, we already have a tool that allows projects to calculate the carbon contained in soils and claim verified emission reductions out of that. So whenever you have a project that follows the AR methodology, you can just directly apply that tool. In the case where you want to, let's say, claim credits from soil organic carbon, let's say from an agroforestry system, but you only want to focus on the soil organic carbon component, then in such case, it will be necessary to have an activity module for that specific activity. So in other words, whenever you have to quantify also for the carbon stored in the biomass of trees, you have to follow the AR methodology and the associated SOC tool. Whenever you just want to focus only on the soil organic carbon, let's say as an agroforestry system, for example, then it will be necessary to develop a new activity module.
Thanks, Giancarlo. Another question about kind of parallel paths. Is it mandatory to carry out SOC project with IFM, afforestation, etc.? I mean, can we carry out only SOC with any of the three approaches? I think you have touched this already, but maybe just to clarify.
Yes, sure. So for an AR project, it is not mandatory. It's just optional to apply the SOC tool to get VERs out of SOC. In the case where, I mean, for IFM, we don't have a methodology yet, and we are planning on expanding our scope to also include IFM. Again, in that case, I'm thinking that it will follow the same approach as we do for AR projects. And if, as I mentioned, if you're working on an agroforestry system and you don't want to, or your project activity doesn't involve actually planting trees, you just want to claim the soil organic carbon, which is already there, then for that case, you will need to develop an activity module under this framework methodology.
Super, thanks. And those asking the questions, feel free to follow up if anything else comes to mind. We have another question around the uncertainty deduction. The question is it only applicable for approach 3 or also for approaches 1 and 2?
So the deductions apply in any case where the uncertainty is above 20%. margin of error at the 90% confidence level. The idea is that if one applies approach one, one will select the number of samples according to meet the uncertainty requirements and not go above the 20%. But yes, in any case, a deduction will be applied if it's the uncertainty is beyond 20%.
Great. A question on leakage. How do you consider leakage connected to the import of organic matter from outside the project area? That is, that OM is missing from other areas then? Perhaps you understand better that, that question.
So that will have to be assessed at the level of activity module if relevant to the project activity that is being submitted for certification.
Okay. And then how do we consider the fact that 1 kilogram of carbon stored at year 1 does not have a direct avoided 44 to 12 kilograms CO2e during the assessment period? Ooh, I'm getting in the deep end here.
Yeah, not sure I'm understanding the question.
Let's come back to that one, perhaps.
Yeah.
Forward it to you in writing. It might be easier for you to process.
Okay.
We have a question around in situ measurements. Is this just within time on the same plots? It doesn't take surrounding or similar farms into account as a reference. As an example, they say, let's say we have a program exclusively for organic farmers where we promote reduced tillage. Now, how do we make sure that the measured SOC changes are only due to reduced tillage and not due to being an organic farmer?
Yeah, so in that case, the idea is that you do baseline measurements on the same plots where the project activity will be implemented. It could be the case that we are talking about a retroactive project, meaning that the activities are already in place, therefore there's no way of knowing the baseline SOC stocks for those specific areas. So at the level of an activity module, if this is the case, a developer could request a deviation to that rule, indicating that being this the case, surrounding farms could be used to define the baseline. And also, if there are more than one activities being implemented, like in this case, reduced tillage plus organic farming, it is at the level of activity module that a developer needs to clearly delineate how it will be possible to differentiate the benefit generated by each of these activities, or if it's not possible, then at least in the baseline it will be necessary to account for SOC stocks on all farms that are only doing organic farming without the reduced tillage part. So at least that factor is already considered in the calculations.
Super. A question regarding the use of biochar and wollastonite. Have peer review showing increase of carbon in soil? Are soil amendments added to the calculations? Is that clear?
So soil amendments will be an activity module per se. So if residues, mulch, or any amendments are being added to the soil, that represents the actual project activity. So the activity module will have to calculate or estimate, if based on models, how much carbon is stored because of that activity and what would be the crediting period and any risk of reversals for that particular activity.
So that would require the development of a new activity module.
Yes.
Got it. I think I know the answer to this one. Can you please share the detailed method for measurement option so that I can go through whether I can do it in Australian grazing land? I assume that all of this information is in the Soil Organic Framework Methodology on our website. Am I right, Giancarlo?
Yes, so the framework methodology already provides two eligible sampling method, ECRAF protocol and the BCS SOC modular methodology. And if a developer wants to use a different module, then it should contact the Gold Standard Secretariat first for assessing the eligibility of this new approach.
Okay, this person follows up to say that they have been doing under the Australian under the Climate Solutions Fund. So I don't know if that gives any further reference for you, but
no, we will need to assess that protocol to determine if it's compatible or equivalent to the ones already deemed eligible by the methodology.
Got it. A question on permanence now. How do you consider the non-permanence risk? Soil organic carbon stocks are highly likely to be released by a change of practices. So how do you apply a buffer, or how do we handle it?
Yeah, so we know that, let's say in smallholder projects, farmers, let's say, are more likely to enter and leave a project. So whenever an SOC project is developed, as I mentioned, it should be any areas leaving the project should be accounted for as full reversals. This departure from a participant in the project should be explained by the project owner. Ideally, at the start of the project, participants should have a commitment to stay in the project for the duration of the crediting period. If participants leave the project, then it should be clearly justified and explained by the project owner, because depending on different scenarios of the reversal, is that a developer can access the compliance buffer. So that is all explained in our performance shortfall guidelines that clearly outlines under which scenarios the compliance buffer can be accessed to offset a reversal, and under which scenarios it is the project developer the responsible of addressing directly this reversal by offsetting with equivalent gold standard VERs.
Right. So similar approach to the projects. So there are a couple questions, quick ones I think you can knock off quickly. We are already accredited with GS with the afforestation framework. Can we add this to the SOC framework? Again, I think you probably have covered this. And is the methodology applicable for European projects?
So a project which is already registered on the AR and wants to issue credits from soil organic carbon can do so using the tool for AR projects. So it's not necessary to apply an activity module, just need to apply that SOC tool. There is a review fee for approving that tool for the project, and then the project can issue VERs only on verified years for SOC. So there are no PERs for soil organic carbon under AR projects. And the second question about a European project, yes, I mean, there are no geographical restrictions, and it will be a matter of determining that if there is no double counting based on any national emission trading scheme. But in essence, the methodology can be developed for projects anywhere in the world.
Great. So there's both an obvious and a not so obvious answer to the next question. The question is, can it be used for offsetting? And I'll answer the obvious bit and then pass it over to Owen, perhaps for a broader conversation around the kind of future voluntary carbon market. So these will be issued carbon credits, so they can be used for offsetting. But maybe, Owen, do you want to give a quick synopsis on the direction of travel for the voluntary carbon market post 2020?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's a good question. I'd encourage everybody thinking of engaging with this framework to understand the direction of travel that the market itself is going towards. And just I would preface the specific question with saying that the markets generally, not just the voluntary market, but compliance too, it's really a kind of watershed moment in which policy and rule books will change and new activity types will likely come to the fore, like we've seen with nature-based solutions. New regulated schemes will come into existence. So there's an awful lot of stuff that is meaning that we are moving into a new era of the carbon markets. And so I kind of hinted earlier that Gold Standard will release a policy brief in the coming month or so that will give an overview of where we think we fit in and what roles we'll undertake in the market in issuing and labeling credits like we always have, and what we stand for. We'll also cover in that the direction of travel on some key policy stuff, like our alignment with the Paris Agreement and the types of activities we'll cover. So I won't go to all of those here because, come to the webinars during that consultation and take time to read that document. It's really important that everybody understands. So yes, the credits here are intended for use in voluntary offsetting. What we expect to see in a very brief synopsis in the coming years is the market start to differentiate between credits that have had an adjustment from their host country, so it's not double claimed with the host country reporting, and then things like CORSIA come into play. You'd be eligible for CORSIA, and that starts to differentiate the types of claims associated with those credits, and then also that I expect to see more delineation between removals units like the ones generated through this framework and emission reductions units, and that's partly driven by the net zero dialogue that's been happening amongst the science-based targets partners. I just would sign off that answer by saying, to reassure everybody that's looking at emission reduction projects as well, that doesn't mean removals will replace emission reductions and there's no value in emission reductions. The different claims made for different units in different contexts will be the subject of much scrutiny and much evolution in the coming years as well. But ultimately, the intention here is to issue credits to work in the market, and where in the market they work and which claims will start to evolve over the coming years. So do look out for that policy brief and consultation. I really think it's important that everybody understands what's coming next there.
Thanks, Owen. A few rapid fire questions. The first one I'll answer. Will you share the PowerPoint? Absolutely. Then for Giancarlo, are we considering accepting the Cool Farm tool as an activity under our framework? And who validates SOC modules under Approach 2, Gold Standard, or DOE auditors, or both? And there's also a question around how long you expect the approval process for activity modules to take. So maybe if you could take those in turn.
Sure. So the Cool Farm tool is not being used under this methodology, but I think it's being used for the value chain initiative. Maybe Owen can add some details to that one. Then the second question about the approval of an activity module, it is done by Gold Standard. And then the third question was about the time frame for.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the complexity of an activity module and based on the fact that there might be a 30-day consultation period and an approval by our LUF Technical Advisory Committee, which meets once per month, we are expecting a period between 3 to 5 months as an average, yes.
Great. Anything to add, Owen, on the Cool Farm tool?
Sorry, I was on mute. So the Cool Farm that we're actually a member of the Cool Farm Alliance and speak regularly at their AGMs, and we have explored and continue to explore whether the Cool Farm tool could be used for the purpose of issuing carbon credits. We actually have an approval in principle for that, but more work is needed on a couple of areas. It is indeed part of our thinking on value chain as well. So we're looking into whether it's a tool that could be used by companies for Scope 3 reporting too. So yeah, I would say with the Cool Farm tool, a lot of goodwill between the two organizations, and you may well see some more developments in that space in the coming period.
Great. As we're coming up on time, I'll see if Giancarlo, you can take these two. There's a question that asks, on the one hand, you want to exclude land use change. On the other hand, you allow for leakage as long as you calculate that. Can you explain? And then the second question, does the land need to be continuously degraded in the baseline scenario to be eligible?
Okay, sure. So we don't allow for land use change in the project area. whereas leakage is the result of the displacement of activities outside the project area. So the methodology is assuming that there won't be leakage because there shouldn't be a reduction in yields in the project area as compared to the baseline. But in any case, if there is such situation, then leakage should be accounted. And of course, we're talking about land use change or loss of above ground biomass, in this case, specifically outside the project area. And the second question was about, can you repeat it, please, Sarah?
Does land need to be continuously degraded in the
no, these are sure. So no, there is no need for degraded land in the baseline scenario. The need is for having the same agricultural activity 5 years before the project start date, at least 5 years, and then that is used to calculate the carbon stock, the average carbon stock for the baseline.
Great. We are at time. We do have some additional questions that we can follow up with you bilaterally on, but just to respect everyone's time, we'll wrap it up here. Just a reminder that we will share the recording and slides, and a reminder on questions. Anything around general questions on the framework or the methodology or around activity module approval, please direct them to Giancarlo, or you can send it to our general help email address. If you have questions about eligibility, specific methodology clarifications, or if you're set to pop on a project certification, please get in touch with our partners at SustainCert. You'll see Robin Ducheneau here and also the general help desk. Anyone will serve that purpose. So with that, I'd like to thank Owen and Giancarlo and Vikash, who has also supported the development on the side, Vikash Talian, who's on the line, and all of you who have taken the time to listen and share your questions. We hope you'll have projects to bring forward and continue to share the story about credibility in this space, in this market where we think it's so of the utmost importance. So thanks for your support and attention, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.